Hey, well, what's up, Colliders? Welcome to The Collision, and Happy New Year! And what better way to kick off the year than a horror movie about a creepy doll? Because they're all creepy. Dolls are inherently creepy. A perfect fodder for a horror movie, and M3GAN, the first movie of the year, just hit theaters. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So like I said, dolls are just creepy. This is obviously not the first horror movie that has taken that premise, the creepiness of dolls, and made it, into like some horror story. But M3GAN has been a movie that's actually been getting kind of a lot of buzz. Some of the dances and things have gone viral in various places. And let's be honest, there's just not a lot of movies coming out until for the next couple of months. Kind of that bleak start of the movie season. So I thought I would check this out. And like I said, this is a horror movie. And I know, especially, again, approaching this movie from a Christian perspective, that Christians notoriously have a very complicated relationship with horror movies. Obviously, that's a bigger discussion. That's a discussion for another day. Although I will say, if you are someone that just finds Christianity kind of incompatible with kind of the horror genre of any variety, then this won't make you a believer. This movie won't necessarily change your mind. But I'll be honest, this is not a movie necessarily that I was excited to see. I'm not one that enjoys horror movies, or at least certain types, the more graphic, violent, gory type. I have an issue with those movies just as a Christian, and I just don't enjoy that type of movie. But I actually enjoyed a lot of things going on in this movie. And I think maybe some people like me that aren't necessarily big horror fans might this might be a little more accessible to them. So Blumhouse, the production company for this movie, they've kind of developed a reputation over the last 5 to 10 years for kind of elevating horror movies beyond just sort of like the gutter of just sort of desensitizing and just how violent can we make it, and actually kind of telling compelling human-centric stories in kind of that more horrific kind of thriller kind of tension and some of that. And they do that again with this movie. We'll get into it in a second. This is very much sort of a human-centric movie, even though the main character is a non-human doll. And I think additionally, part of what kind of even drew me to even check this movie out is that this movie is rated PG-13. Kind of unlike would be expected from a lot of horror movies, this is not an R-rated movie. Obviously, it seems like the intention is to maybe widen the audience, the potential audience that can see this movie. And I think it's actually for the better. The PG-13 rating kind of provides some parameters, things they can't do. Obviously, there is violence. This is a movie about a murderous, creepy doll. So you do get some of that. But this film isn't just sort of a desensitizing, just gore fest and blood. And how can we shock people by showing some over-the-top bit of violence? There's actually, although there is clear, gruesome violence, there's very little of that on screen. Almost all of it happens off screen. Again, we'll get into the specifics of that. But this is more a movie that kind of builds the horror kind of element on the premise rather than just sort of the visuals of just bad things happening. And because this is a slow burn. This is a movie that takes its time. I think kind of the actual like physical horror, the moments, like the murders and all that kind of stuff that is coming eventually, that really doesn't happen till, I think, I even looked at my watch. This is about almost an hour into this runtime, which is like an hour and 45-minute runtime. So I'd say about almost like 2/3 into this movie before like the actual like physical horror starts unfolding. And then things go crazy and things definitely build by the end. But this is kind of more in the vein of like the classic, don't reveal the monster or the terror until kind of the end. Obviously, the doll, M3GAN, the AI doll, is in this thing right from the start. But it kind of builds the tension more on just sort of this like this sort of unsettling, sort of like the disaster's coming. Is this sort of building, and even just the appearance of the doll and like the voice, it sounds human but also slightly off human, kind of a little more mechanical, and even the appearance is sort of that like uncanny valley where she's a little girl, but she's obviously still looks like a doll, but she doesn't move like a human, but she moves more fluidly than a doll. Which is definitely building a lot of this sort of that like unease, that growing tension. That when like the horror does happen, they've kind of established the stakes, and they've really established, I think maybe even more importantly, like the emotional connection between this girl who's grieving from the loss of her parents died, and she's grieving and kind of given adopted by her aunt, who doesn't necessarily have space for her or want her, or she's busy in her job, and you sort of see this stand-in AI doll that she has, and you see their relationship, you see the good, you see how the doll helps her all the time, knowing that kind of something's not right. This isn't sort of how it's meant to be. And also, I said the tone of this thing, it's very kind of self-aware. I think most of us kind of think of horror movies as just like very dark. Everything's dark. This movie isn't. This is a very kind of playful tone. It's really more of like a horror comedy than it is just like a straight, like a Chucky kind of movie, like a horror movie. It's kind of equal parts comedy and horror. And at times, this movie is actually quite funny, although some of the humor is of a darker variety. But this is like a self-aware. It leans into some of the silliness of the situation, and even like some of the horror tropes that you kind of, like the jump scares and some of that. It kind of almost unapologetically like embraces the fact that this is kind of a silly premise, but it does sort of all throughout, even at the end when things do kind of get more violent and brutal. It kind of keeps more, like most of the action happens like in the day, in the middle of the day, in the sun. It's not trying to sort of be this real dark, gloomy atmosphere. Most of the aesthetic is very kind of bright and cheerful, and like the music's cheerful, and the characters are kind of bantering. Cheerfully and kind of upbeat. So definitely not like there's like a real dark horror movie like maybe you might expect. As far as content, kind of things to consider on the surface of this thing. Profanity, there's quite a bit of profanity in this. There is one very overt F-bomb, which is spoken by a young kid character I think to his mother. Obviously, he's like a bully character, so there's that. And there's just plenty of other profanity sort of all throughout this. Words starting with S and B and kind of used throughout. Maybe one that will be even more, I think, off-putting, especially for Christian viewers. The Lord's name is kind of used very kind of crudely in vain. I'd say maybe 5 to 10 times. It seems like it was happening a lot. Characters just sort of yelling JC or just using Jesus' name as some sort of curse. So that is definitely in that. Wasn't a fan of that. And then there's this sort of some other crude word people call, use crude words for like a male genitalia and some other kind of crude words that are kind of scattered throughout that. So there is a fairly heavy amount of profanity, although still within the confines of like a PG-13 rating. Violence, like I said, this is a horror movie about a doll that kills people. So there is violence, but most of the violence happens off screen. It's more implied violence. You don't necessarily see the carnage. You see kind of glimpses of it, like a boy kind of gets his like ear pulled off, and you kind of see some of that. But then when the characters actually die, a character gets hit by a car, character kind of gets killed with sort of weed poison sprayed with that. 2 characters get stabbed. Very little of that happens in camera. It sort of cuts away or kind of before, more implying what happened. So it is violent, and you do sort of see glimpses of 2 characters on the ground. You see the blood around them, but it doesn't center in on gore or anything. So it's not violent visually, but it definitely is violent. Kind of more implied. I think about maybe 4 characters in this get killed. So there is that. Sexuality, there's no sexuality in this thing. Maybe the other area, kind of content to consider, is spirituality. I think maybe some Christians might want to know, the doll isn't like a satanic kind of, this isn't like a possessed doll like maybe some other horror stories. This is purely AI, this is technology. This is sort of our own kind of Frankenstein creation. So it's not spiritual in that way. The only thing that kind of came to mind is there is at one point they do sort of talk about spiritual things, where a young kind of bully that's been killed, this girl is told that he's probably in a better place, and later the girl asks the doll, do you think he is in a better place? And the doll says, no, he's not in a better place, and kind of says like, if there is such a place as heaven, it's not a place, it's not, wouldn't be a place for people like that. So kind of, I guess, dismissing, whether heaven's real or anything like that. So they do kind of have that kind of conversation. But other than that, not a whole lot of other content stuff to worry about. As far as themes, kind of things going on beneath the surface of this thing, The theme is not subtle. This isn't something that you have to dig and try and refine the underpinnings and worldview stuff. This is very much intended to be sort of this cautionary tale, kind of this almost this like fable or parable about the dangers of like this over reliance on technology, and how sort of despite some of the good and the advantage of technology, it's not it's sort of ill-suited as like as a parent or like a stand-in guardian or educator for children. Like I said, it's not subtle, but I think it's actually effective because it's not subtle. This is very much kind of taking a very commonplace issue and things I think a lot of parents like myself can relate to, and just sort of amplifying it, turning the volume up, and kind of showcasing it, almost like a slippery slope of, kind of some of the dangers of that in this sort of exaggerated form. Because it kind of near the start of this movie, when there's sort of this like a sales pitch for this new AI doll that to take care of these kids, or a voiceover says, that this doll will take care of all the, the monotonous daily tasks of parenting, so that you can spend time on the things that are really important, which in the context of the film is this woman's career and her work and meeting her deadlines, and kind of, the doll will tuck the kid in and make sure they brush their teeth, and you can kind of do what really matters and focus on your career. And again, any parent who's given their kid an iPad and sent them off so they can get something done or just have a moment of peace can definitely relate to that challenge and that tension. But obviously, the message of this film is that kind of taken to extremes is dangerous. One of the kind of the inventors of this doll at one point is they're having a conversation that we designed this toy to assist parents, not to replace parents. And you kind of see this kind of from different angles, just sort of how that relationship kind of, for better, but mostly for worse, kind of plays out. You see kind of the addictive nature of technology. This young girl becomes very, especially because she's in such an emotional kind of a, she's hurting, she's grieving from the loss of her parents. Sort of her attachment to this doll and this addictive nature of technology, where she can only be okay if she sort of has this comfort, and as long as she's with the doll, she's okay. But then she can't, she's not really emotionally suited to interact with the world and real people, or the world at large. And kind of on the other side of that, you also see kind of the jealous nature of technology. I think because M3GAN kind of is like a stand-in for technology, sort of this like personification of that. You also see that she's sort of jealous. It sort of personifies that she just wants the attention of this girl. She wants to be the be-all and end-all of the girl. She's kind of jealous of the girl's sort of adoptive aunt, guardian, or kind of any of the other human figures in her life. She sort of wants all of her attention. Which obviously serves as an effective metaphor for technology. Maybe kind of the last area in that is this sort of the commercialization of the technology. A lot of this movie plays out in sort of this factory where the aunt works, sort of the creator of this doll. And it becomes very clear that these people don't have the children's best interests at heart. They're trying to create products that are addictive, that sort of are essential for kids. It's all about profit and bottom line, and outdoing the competition. So I think although it is sort of paints with very broad brushstrokes, and it is predictable. You kind of know exactly where the film's going from the moment it starts, because there's been movies like this before. I do think there are some themes in here about technology that, not just as Christians, but just as any people, I think maybe even especially as parents, that are worth working through and kind of thinking through sort of that relationship between kind of technology and kids' development and kind of emotional well-being. So yeah, in the end, I actually enjoyed this movie a lot because it is sort of a horror movie and maybe more of a complicated genre. This isn't necessarily a film that I would just sort of give this stamp of, to tell everyone to go see. I think it will kind of depend on just sort of how you engage with films like this. If you are maybe put off by the premise of a doll murdering people, some of that kind of horror genre stuff, I think that will kind of make or break how you approach this movie. But at least for me, someone that isn't necessarily a huge horror person, is not typically comfortable with like the more gory, more like desensitizing, violent nature of horror movies, I thought this movie struck a good balance that, although it's doing things that have been done before, I think because it centers it so much in sort of this like personal human nature. It's not just, AI taking over the world, but it's sort of a personal, how do we relate with technology? What role does that play? What role does that play in a family? How much of a tool is that for a parent? Because it kind of deals with it on a more personal nature. I enjoy it. I think there is some elements for Christians to engage with, and I do think keeping a lot of at least the violent content kind of off screen will make it maybe more accessible for Christian viewers if the language isn't a deterrent. But hey, I'm curious to see what you guys think. I don't know how big of a movie this will be. I know it's been getting a lot of buzz. Not sure how many people are interested in it, but if you do check it out, love to have a conversation about it. If you saw kind of some of the themes, if you enjoyed it, maybe you thought it was too watered down for a horror movie, or maybe like me, you found it more accessible because it was more watered down and not just some kind of gore fest. Would love to hear from you. If you haven't done so, I encourage you guys, subscribe to our channel, become a Collider. A lot of movies coming out this year. We've got a lot of live streams and other kind of videos and stuff we got planned. It's going to be a big year. Would love to have you be a part of it. But most of all, guys, thanks for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.